Hi, this is Dave Fitzpatrick with the X channel, The Great Awakening. And for those of you that aren't familiar with me, my channel primarily is focused on content related to our past, and in particular, our ancient past. That includes this idea that our planet periodically goes through some cataclysmic events, roughly every 6,000 and 12,000 years, with the 12,000 year events appearing to be on a much larger scale, involving more significant portions of the planet, if you will. So tied to that, and the reason for this particular video, a couple of days ago I came across a video by Stephanie Buchanan. And by the way, I'll put a link somewhere in the thread here on X to her video. But anyway, in that video, she introduces herself, and she is comparing and contrasting two theories on the potential driving mechanisms of these cataclysmic events. One of them is the ECDO theory proposed by Roger Cunningham. The other is Ben Davidson's EDC theory. And she's modeling data to try and figure out which one is the more likely scenario that occurs. Well, with the ECDO theory, which is Roger's theory, basically the entire outer rotational body consisting of the shell and the mantle of the Earth decouples from the core, okay? So that's Roger's theory. Ben's idea is that it's just the shell of the Earth that decouples, okay, during these events. So the other night, I'm in bed, and this is so funny. I don't know how it is with you guys, but basically, I do a lot of my thinking at night when I'm in bed. And in particular, I'll wake up, maybe go to the bathroom, go back to bed, and I'm laying there, and I'll start thinking of this stuff. And ultimately, then it keeps me awake because I can't stop thinking about it. So I was sort of re-going through Stephanie's video, and I got to thinking, and this pertains more to Roger's theory, that we're involving a much deeper chunk of the planet in this whole unlocking process. And if you go to the Bible, you go to Genesis, and you read the flood story, this is what's intriguing to me. So this popped into my head. So, and I'm going to read this directly. So if you go to Genesis 7, verse 11 to 12, it describes the whole flood. And in verse 11, and a lot of people miss this, this is what it says. In Noah's 600th year, on the 17th day of the second month, the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the windows of heaven open. Everybody talks about the 40 days of rain, but a lot of people miss this phrase here, fountains of the deep burst open, okay? Now keep that in mind. It's not just the Bible that has similar phrasing. If you go to the Quran, you'll read this. The fountains of the great deep is how it's referred to in the Quran. And I'm going to quote from Surah, it's 54, 11 through 12. It states this. So we opened the gates of heaven with pouring rain and caused the earth to burst forth with springs, so the waters met for a matter already predestined. Okay? Now, let's take it one step further, and I'm going to get to my point here in just a second. Even more interesting than that, there's this mention of heated water, not just water bursting forth, but heated water. So if you look at the Talmud and the Quran, with the Quran, Noah is given a sign that the flood would officially start when the oven gushed forth. Okay, now that's from the Quran. If you look at the Talmud, it notes that the water was so incredibly hot and chemically aggressive that it didn't just drown people, it practically dissolved them, stripping the flesh off their bones before they even settled to the bottom of the sea. So now you think back in particular, and now I'm focusing on Roger's theory, that if we did have this water bursting forth, what would cause that? So for several years, I was really thinking, and I still think that we have some kind of evidence that we have had maybe comets striking the Earth. Maybe there's some involvement of, if you go to Ben's theory that our sun micronovas, maybe there's ejecta in addition to plasma that strikes the planet, and that's part of the process. I get that, but what would cause water to burst? Well, if a comet hit an open ocean, that absolutely would. But think about this. If we have the whole process of our mantle in the shell of the Earth, basically decoupling from the core, think about the forces and the heat involved in that. Well, guess what? We have more than a couple of different articles that show that there is a lot of water tied up in rock in the mantle of our planet. So then think about this. This really supports Roger's theory. If we have this process of decoupling occurring, that rock would heat up enough that it could potentially release water that is right now entombed in those, and it's a substantial amount of rock. I think in at least one of the papers, I should have put it down here, so I had it with me, but you can look this up. Matter of fact, I will link to at least one of the papers so you can read this stuff. But there's a lot of water tied up in that rock, and there's estimates that if just 1% of the weight of the mantle rock is water, just 1% of it, that would be the equivalent of 3 times the amount of water in our oceans. So now, okay, let's just assume, what if that is the case, that it's actually this decoupling that is now releasing water from inside the mantle, in addition to all the water in the ocean and what's going to take place there? What would that do to the folks out there that are working on all of these different modeling? What would that do to those models? So anyway, I don't think, actually, I've read a good bit of Roger's book. By the way, get that book if you haven't already. It's a great book. And I can't find any reference in Roger, if you're seeing this, maybe you can add some interesting commentary to this, but if you read his book, I don't think there's any mention of this idea of the water being stored in the rock and what effect that would have if we had such a decoupling occur. So anyway, thanks to Stephanie in your video, but this jarred, some interesting thoughts here for me. So anyway, enjoy and go dig into this. Have fun. Take care.